By 4000 BC, the Egyptian civilization was beginning to take shape. In the next 800 years, many of the foundations of a unified Egyptian nation would be laid, with regional kingdoms coming to existence in Upper Egypt. The last period of prehistory in Egypt became known as the Naqada period. Historians have partitioned the Naqada period into three phases, namely the early, middle and late Naqada periods, collectively spanning the last 1000 years of Egyptian prehistory. The lack of a writing system, combined with the fact that virtually all settlements of this time period have been washed away by Nile floods, mean that not much is known about it. Fortunately, the graveyards of these settlements were largely unaffected by floods, and the size of cemeteries showed that there were three main centers of production in Upper Egypt. These were Abydos, Hierakonpolis, and Naqada, which lends its name to the time period as its cemeteries were the first to be excavated. All three towns would end up playing a pivotal role in Egyptian history, as in the future they would struggle for supremacy in Upper Egypt. The Naqadan culture supplanted the earlier Badarian culture, but initially only differed from it in a few key ways, one of which concerned hunting. The Badarians had partly relied on hunting for food, adopting a semi-nomadic lifestyle where they would move between hunting grounds and agricultural land, depending on the time of year. The Naqadans abandoned this lifestyle in favor of a sedentary one, and now fully relied on agriculture, fishing, and the farming of animals for their food. Over time, the Naqadans began to see a food surplus develop, another advantage they had over earlier inhabitants of Egypt. This food surplus allowed more members of early communities to become specialists, helping advance their culture even further. A general rule for an ancient town is that 10 farmers were required to support one specialist not busy farming. Due to the fact that the Nile was, and still is, exceptional agricultural land, and that a second wave of farming technologies arrived from the Levant in the early period, the Naqadans probably only needed 7 or 8 farmers for every specialist. These specialists got to work setting up large, single-purpose production facilities. Hierakonpolis in particular seems to have been quite productive, as many pottery workshops have been discovered there. Over 300,000 pieces of pottery have been unearthed at Naqada, suggesting it too was seriously productive. The oldest brewery in the world was discovered at Hierakonpolis. The main ingredient of the beer produced there was emmer wheat, with grapes and dates added to increase the sugar content of the brew. The beer would have had a low alcohol content but a high nutritional value, and estimates suggest that the brewery could have produced as much as 1,500 liters of beer every day, although the actual amount was probably far lower. Despite the improvement of living conditions in the Naqadan settlements, excavations show that the average lifespan of people from this time period was around 50 years, with the entire population of Egypt being 100 to 300,000 in 3500 BC. The developments in Upper Egypt indicate some level of organization, and naturally there were likely a handful of local leaders directing and planning these developments. The fact that hierarchies had begun developing in Egypt is further supported by excavated graves. At the beginning of the early period, the graves of all buried show little difference, with a few being richer than others. By the end of the period, a number of large and rich graves had appeared, being separated from the poorer graves in the cemetery. Even the bones of the people buried there indicate they lived easier lives than those buried elsewhere. Death began to play an important role in Egyptian culture. The early Naqada period had seen many developments take place, and the middle period was to continue this trend. These developments would be mainly in the form of copper and boats. An excavation of a tomb near Hierakonpolis yielded the oldest known tomb painting in all of Egypt. The tomb dates from around 3500 BC, and the painting is significant not only for its novelty, but also for its subject. It depicts a fleet of boats sailing along the Nile. Boats would play a more prominent role in Egyptian history from this point onwards. Around Hierakonpolis, archaeologists have also found the first instances of deliberate mummification, with bodies wrapped in linen. Throughout the Middle Period, we also see an increase in really wealthy tombs, such as the one with the wall painting. These tombs show that the Egyptians were making significant developments in stoneworking, being able to work on and use larger and harder stone blocks. The excavation of tombs also showed that there was an increase in the use of gold and silver in Egyptian society. The towns of Naqada and Abydos were rich in gold, as the hills east of the Nile contained considerable gold deposits. Up until this point, our story focused almost exclusively on Upper Egypt, but Lower Egypt also had a part to play. Around 4000 BC, the town of Madi was founded in an area close to modern-day Cairo. Madi would grow to become an important trading post, linking the Levant with Upper Egypt. One of the main exports was pottery, and the main import, as well as the reason why Madi became significant, was copper. Copper was a game changer in ancient Egypt. Copper tools were superior to stone and wood ones, and although copper technologies had existed in Egypt for hundreds of years, it was only when Madi began importing large quantities of copper that copper tools became widespread. Madi became so rich in copper that excavations there have uncovered houses where the entire floor is stained green as a result of copper residue. This copper was mainly mined in the Sinai Peninsula, but over time the Madians developed mines in the hills of eastern Egypt to ensure a local supply of copper. The craftsmen of Madi created copper axes, blades, and chisels. These tools greatly benefited shipbuilding, and throughout the Middle Period we see the emergence of larger ships powered by both oar and sail. An immediate consequence of this was that Upper and Lower Egypt became far more connected, setting the stage for possible unification. That concludes the video. Join me in the next one as we explore how three kingdoms in Upper Egypt would compete for supremacy, and how one would end up unifying the entire land.